I'll never forget the day my son stopped talking to me. It was like a punch to the gut, a slap in the face, a betrayal that I never saw coming. He was 17 at the time, and I had just grounded him for coming home late from a party. He was furious, and he told me that he hated me and never wanted to speak to me again. I tried to reach out to him, to apologize and make amends, but he shut me out completely. He changed his phone number, blocked me on social media, and even moved out of the house. I was devastated, and I didn't know how to deal with the pain and the guilt that I felt. Years went by, and I heard nothing from my son. I would occasionally see him around town, but he would ignore me or pretend that he didn't see me. It was like I was a ghost to him, invisible and insignificant. But then, one day, I received a call from my brother's lawyer. My brother had passed away, and he had left me a large sum of money in his will. I was shocked and saddened by the news, but also grateful for the inheritance. As I was going through my brother's belongings, I found a letter that he had written to me. In it, he told me that he was proud of me, and that he knew that I would do the right thing with the money. He also told me that he knew that my son and I were estranged, but that he hoped that we would one day reconcile. I was touched by the letter, and I felt a sense of responsibility to use the money wisely. I decided to put some of it aside for my son, hoping that one day he would come back to me and we could reconcile. And then, out of the blue, I received a call from my son. He was calling to ask for my help, to bail him out of a difficult situation. He had gotten himself into debt, and he needed my assistance to get out of it. I was taken aback by the call, and I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to help him, to forgive him and take him back in. But another part of me was angry and hurt, and I didn't want to enable his bad behavior. As I listened to his voice on the phone, I felt a mix of emotions. I was happy to hear from him, but also sad and angry. I didn't know what to do, and I didn't know how to respond. But as I looked back on the past, I realized that I had been given a second chance. I had been given the opportunity to forgive my son, to take him back in and to start anew. And I knew that I had to take it, no matter how difficult it would be. I took a deep breath, and I began to speak. "Hello, son," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "It's been a long time. How are you?" "I've been better, Dad," he replied, his voice hesitant and unsure. "I've gotten myself into a bit of trouble, and I need your help." I felt a surge of anger and frustration, mixed with a deep sense of disappointment. How could he just call me out of the blue, after all these years, and expect me to bail him out of trouble? But as I looked back on the past, I realized that I had to let go of my anger and resentment. I had to forgive him, no matter how difficult it was. "What kind of trouble?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I owe some people money," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "A lot of money. And they're threatening to hurt me if I don't pay up." I felt a chill run down my spine as I listened to his words. What had he gotten himself into? And how much money was he talking about? "How much do you owe?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. $50,000, he replied, his voice cracking with fear. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. $50,000 was a lot of money, and I knew that I had to be careful. I didn't want to enable his bad behavior, but at the same time, I couldn't just leave him to fend for himself. "Where did you get into this kind of debt?" I asked, trying to understand the situation. "I was trying to make some money, Dad," he said, his voice defensive. "I was trying to invest in a business, but it didn't work out. And now I owe these people money, and they're going to hurt me if I don't pay up." I felt a surge of anger and frustration as I listened to his words. He had always been reckless and impulsive, and now he was in deep trouble. But as I looked back on the past, I realized that I had to let go of my anger and resentment. I had to forgive him, no matter how difficult it was. "I'll help you, son," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But you have to promise me that you'll change your ways. You have to promise me that you'll be more responsible and careful in the future." "I promise, Dad," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I'll do anything to get out of this mess. I'll do anything to make it right." I felt a sense of hope and optimism as I listened to his words. Maybe, just maybe, this was the wake-up call that he needed. Maybe this was the chance for him to turn his life around and start anew. But as I looked deeper into the situation, I realized that things were more complicated than I had initially thought. There were people involved, people who were not going to let him off the hook easily. And I knew that I had to be careful, very careful, if I was going to help him get out of this mess. "I'll need to talk to these people, son," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll need to negotiate with them and see if we can come to some kind of agreement." "I understand, Dad," he said, his voice filled with fear. "But please, you have to be careful. These people are not to be trusted. They're ruthless and cunning, and they'll stop at nothing to get what they want." I felt a chill run down my spine as I listened to his words. What had he gotten himself into? And what kind of people was he dealing with? "Don't worry, son," I said, trying to reassure him. "I'll be careful. I'll do whatever it takes to help you get out of this mess." But as I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease and uncertainty. I had a feeling that I was getting into something much bigger and more complicated than I had initially thought. And I knew that I had to be careful, very careful, if I was going to help my son get out of this mess alive. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, my mind racing with thoughts of my son's predicament. I couldn't concentrate on anything, and I found myself constantly checking my phone for any messages or updates. I knew that I had to do something, but I wasn't sure what. As the sun began to set, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. I strolled through the quiet streets of my neighborhood, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that had settled over me. But no matter how far I walked, I couldn't seem to shake the feeling that I was in over my head. As I walked, I couldn't help but think about the people my son was dealing with. Who were they, and what did they want from him? Were they loan sharks, or something worse? I knew that I had to be careful, but I also knew that I couldn't just sit back and do nothing. As I turned a corner, I noticed a black SUV parked by the side of the road. It was a sleek, expensive-looking vehicle, and it seemed out of place in our quiet neighborhood. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I walked past it, wondering if it was somehow connected to my son's troubles. I continued walking, my mind racing with thoughts and questions. Who was behind the SUV, and what did they want? Were they watching me, or was I just being paranoid? As I walked, I noticed that the SUV was following me. It was keeping a discreet distance, but I could see it in my rearview mirror. I felt a surge of fear and adrenaline as I quickened my pace, wondering if I was in danger. I didn't know what to do, or where to turn. I felt like I was in a nightmare, with no way out. But I knew that I had to keep moving, had to keep trying to find a way to help my son. As I walked, I noticed a small coffee shop up ahead. I decided to duck inside, hoping to lose the SUV in the crowd. I pushed open the door and stepped inside, scanning the room for any signs of trouble. But as I looked around, I saw nothing out of the ordinary. Just a bunch of people sipping coffee and typing away on their laptops. I let out a sigh of relief and took a seat at the counter, trying to calm my racing heart. As I sat there, I noticed a man sitting in the corner, sipping a cup of coffee. He was a tall, imposing figure, with a rugged face and piercing eyes. He looked like he hadn't shaved in days, and his clothes were rumpled and worn. But despite his rough appearance, there was something about him that seemed off. Something that seemed calculated and deliberate. As I looked at him, he caught my eye and smiled. It was a cold, calculating smile, and it sent a shiver down my spine. I didn't know what to do, or where to turn. I felt like I was in a trap, with no way out. But I knew that I had to keep trying, had to keep fighting to help my son. As I sat there, frozen with fear, the man got up and walked over to me. He towered over me, his eyes glinting with a cold, hard light. "You're the one, aren't you?" he said, his voice low and menacing. "You're the one who's been trying to help your son." I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yes, I am. What do you want?" The man smiled again, his eyes glinting with amusement. "Oh, I think you know exactly what I want," he said. "I want the money, of course. The $50,000 that your son owes us." I felt a surge of fear and adrenaline as I realized who this man was. He was one of the people my son was dealing with, and he was not happy. "What do you plan to do with him?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The man shrugged, his eyes glinting with amusement. "Oh, I think we'll let him off easy. As long as you cooperate, of course." I didn't know what to do, or where to turn. I felt like I was trapped, with no way out. But I knew that I had to keep trying, had to keep fighting to help my son. As I sat there, frozen with fear, the man leaned in close and whispered something in my ear. It was a single word, a word that sent a shiver down my spine. "Tonight." I felt a surge of fear and adrenaline as I heard the word. What did it mean? Was it a threat, or a promise? I tried to ask the man, but he just smiled and turned to leave. "Wait," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you mean?" The man turned back to me, his eyes glinting with amusement. "You'll find out soon enough," he said. "Just be ready." And with that, he turned and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving me feeling shaken and confused. I didn't know what to do, or where to turn. I felt like I was in a nightmare, with no way out. I tried to call my son, but he didn't answer. I left him a message, telling him to be careful and to stay safe. But as I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was too late. That something was already in motion, and that I couldn't stop it. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, my mind racing with thoughts and fears. I tried to focus on my work, but I couldn't concentrate. I kept thinking about the man and his ominous warning. What did he mean? What was going to happen tonight? As the sun began to set, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. I strolled through the quiet streets of my neighborhood, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that had settled over me. But no matter how far I walked, I couldn't seem to shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see the man or one of his associates. But every time, there was no one there. I was starting to feel like I was losing my mind. As I walked, I noticed that the streets were getting darker and more deserted. The streetlights were flickering, casting eerie shadows on the pavement. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that I was alone and vulnerable. I quickened my pace, trying to get back to the safety of my home. But as I turned a corner, I saw a figure waiting for me. It was the man from the coffee shop, and he was standing in front of my house. He was smiling, and his eyes were glinting with amusement. "Welcome home," he said, his voice low and menacing. I felt a surge of fear and adrenaline as I realized that I was trapped. I tried to run, but my legs were frozen with fear. I was at the man's mercy, and I knew it. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The man shrugged, his eyes glinting with amusement. "I want the money," he said. "The $50,000 that your son owes us. And I want it now." I knew that I had to stall, to give myself time to think. But as I looked at the man, I knew that I was running out of time. He was getting impatient, and I could see the anger building in his eyes. I took a deep breath and tried to think. What could I do? How could I get out of this situation? As I stood there, frozen with fear, I heard a noise behind me. It was the sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate. The man's eyes flicked to the side, and he smiled. "Ah, right on time," he said. I turned to see who it was, and my heart sank. It was my son, and he was walking towards us with a look of determination on his face. "Dad, I'm sorry," he said, his voice shaking with fear. "I didn't mean to get you involved in this. I'll pay the money, I promise." The man smiled, his eyes glinting with amusement. "I'm afraid it's too late for that," he said. "The debt has been called in, and it must be paid. In full." I felt a surge of fear and adrenaline as I realized that my son was in grave danger. I had to do something, but what? I took a step forward, trying to position myself between my son and the man. "You're not going to hurt him," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "He's just a kid, he doesn't know what he's gotten himself into." The man raised an eyebrow, his expression amused. "Oh, I think he knows exactly what he's gotten himself into," he said. "He's been playing with fire, and now he's got to pay the price." My son took a step forward, his eyes flashing with defiance. "I'll pay the money," he said. "I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." The man smiled, his eyes glinting with amusement. "I'm afraid it's not that simple," he said. "You see, the debt is not just about the money. It's about the principle. You've been playing games, trying to cheat the system. And now, you've got to pay the price." I felt a surge of fear as I realized that the man was not just talking about the money. He was talking about something much deeper, something that went to the very heart of who we were as people. "What do you want from us?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The man leaned forward, his eyes glinting with intensity. "I want you to understand that there are consequences to your actions," he said. "You can't just play games and expect to get away with it. You've got to take responsibility for your actions." My son took a step forward, his eyes flashing with anger. "I am taking responsibility," he said. "I'm trying to make it right." The man smiled, his eyes glinting with amusement. "Oh, I think you're just trying to save your own skin," he said. "You're not thinking about the bigger picture. You're not thinking about the consequences of your actions." I felt a surge of fear as I realized that the man was not going to let us go easily. He was going to make us pay, no matter what it took. "What do you want us to do?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The man leaned forward, his eyes glinting with intensity. "I want you to come with me," he said. "I want you to see the consequences of your actions. I want you to understand what it means to play with fire." My son took a step back, his eyes flashing with fear. "No," he said. "We're not going anywhere with you." The man smiled, his eyes glinting with amusement. "Oh, I think you are," he said. "You see, you don't have a choice. You're going to come with me, one way or another." I felt a surge of fear as I realized that we were trapped. We were at the man's mercy, and he was not going to let us go easily. I tried to think of a way to escape, but my mind was a blank. I was frozen with fear, unable to move or think. The man took a step forward, his eyes glinting with intensity. "Let's go," he said. "It's time to see the consequences of your actions." I tried to resist, but the man was too strong. He grabbed my arm and pulled me towards the car, his grip like a vice. My son tried to struggle, but he was no match for the man's accomplices. They grabbed him and dragged him towards the car, throwing him into the back seat. I was tossed in beside him, the man getting in behind us. The car sped away from the curb, leaving our quiet neighborhood behind. I didn't know where we were going, but I knew it couldn't be good. The man's words kept echoing in my mind, "You're going to see the consequences of your actions." I tried to talk to my son, to reassure him that everything would be okay. But he just shook his head, his eyes wide with fear. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered. "I didn't mean to get us into this." I put my arm around him, trying to comfort him. But deep down, I was scared too. I didn't know what the man had planned, but I knew it couldn't be good. The car drove for what felt like hours, the silence between us oppressive. Finally, we turned off the main road and onto a dirt track. The car bounced along the rough road, throwing us around the back seat. I tried to hold on to my son, but it was hard to keep my balance. The car stopped in front of a large metal gate, which swung open with a creak. We drove through the gate and onto a large estate, the buildings looming in front of us. I didn't know what this place was, but it looked like some kind of fortress. The car stopped in front of the main building, and the man got out. "Welcome to your new home," he said, his eyes glinting with amusement. My son and I exchanged a fearful glance. What did he mean? Were we prisoners here? The man gestured to the building, and we got out of the car. He led us inside, the doors closing behind us with a clang. We were trapped. I didn't know what the man had planned, but I knew we had to escape. I looked around, trying to take in our surroundings. We were in some kind of office, the walls lined with computers and filing cabinets. The man sat down behind a large desk, gesturing to two chairs in front of him. "Sit down," he said. "We're going to have a little chat." My son and I exchanged a fearful glance, but we had no choice. We sat down in the chairs, our eyes fixed on the man. "So," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You're probably wondering why you're here." I nodded, trying to keep my cool. "Yes," I said. "We are." The man smiled, his eyes glinting with amusement. "Well, let me tell you," he said. "You're here because of your son's little problem. The debt he owes us." My son looked down, his face flushing with shame. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "I didn't mean to get into debt." The man leaned forward, his eyes glinting with intensity. "You should be sorry," he said. "You should be very sorry indeed." I felt a surge of fear as I realized that the man was not going to let us go easily. We were in grave danger, and I didn't know how to get us out of it. As the man's words hung in the air, I felt a sense of desperation wash over me. We were trapped, and I didn't know how to escape. But then, something inside me clicked. I remembered the words of my brother, who had always told me to stand up for myself and fight for what was right. I remembered the struggles I had faced, and the sacrifices I had made. And I knew that I couldn't give up now. With a newfound sense of determination, I stood up and faced the man. "You're not going to hurt us," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "We're not going to pay your debt. We're going to fight back." The man laughed, a cold, cruel sound. "You think you can fight back," he sneered. "You think you can take on me and my organization? You're just a couple of nobodies. We're going to crush you." But I wasn't afraid. I was angry, and I was determined. I looked at my son, and I saw the fear in his eyes. But I also saw something else, a spark of defiance. He was scared, but he was also ready to fight. Together, we stood up to the man and his organization. We fought back with every ounce of strength we had. We used every trick, every tactic, every ounce of cunning to outwit them. And slowly but surely, we began to gain the upper hand. The man's organization was powerful, but it was also corrupt. It was built on lies and deceit, and it was rotten to the core. And as we fought back, we began to expose the truth. We began to reveal the secrets, the lies, and the corruption that had fueled the organization for so long. The man's face turned red with rage as he realized that he was losing. He had underestimated us, and he had underestimated the power of the truth. He had thought that he could bully us, intimidate us, and crush us. But he was wrong. As the truth came to light, the organization began to crumble. The man's accomplices turned against him, and he was left alone to face the consequences of his actions. He was arrested, charged, and convicted of his crimes. And as he sat in his cell, he knew that he had been defeated. My son and I walked out of the courtroom, our heads held high. We had fought back, and we had won. We had stood up for ourselves, and we had stood up for what was right. And as we walked away from the courthouse, we knew that we would never be the same again. We had been through a nightmare, but we had come out the other side. We had been tested, and we had been proved. We had been pushed to the limit, but we had never given up. And as we walked away from the courthouse, I knew that I had finally found the closure I had been searching for. I had finally found the justice I had been seeking. And I had finally found the peace I had been longing for. My son and I hugged each other tightly, tears of joy streaming down our faces. We had done it, we had survived. And as we walked away from the courthouse, we knew that we would always stand together, no matter what. We had been through hell, but we had come out stronger. We had been broken, but we had been healed. And we had been given a second chance. As we walked away from the courthouse, I knew that I would never forget this day. I would never forget the fear, the anger, and the determination that had driven us to fight back. And I would never forget the sense of satisfaction, the sense of closure, and the sense of peace that had come from standing up for ourselves and fighting for what was right. We had been through a nightmare, but we had come out the other side. And as we walked away from the courthouse, I knew that we would always be okay.